The Gospel of Luke is the third Gospel recording in our Scriptures. Luke was not one of the disciples of Jesus, like Matthew was, or an eyewitness of some of the events like Mark could have been. We don't really know the whole story of Luke up until later on, when he joins the Apostle Paul, but he was a person who's recording the events as he's getting eyewitness accounts from Philip, from Paul, from Peter, and he's recording these events down. He's going to record them for a Theophilus. We're not sure who this person is, a lover of God, and also the book of Acts later on as well. Luke was one of the traveling companions. We believe the book written in around the 50s or 60s, perhaps the early 60s, probably after Mark, and probably used Mark somewhat as a guide for the writing of his literature, his book. We don't know exactly where it was written. There's a lot of different options that it could have been. Places such as Greece, Caesarea, Alexandria, Achaia, or Rome. It's very likely in some people's minds it was Rome, that where both Luke and Acts were written. There's reasons for that, but some of that's because that's where the story ends in the book of Acts. And so it's possible that that's where it finished up, was in the city of Rome. Luke 1:3-4 tells the purpose for the book. It seemed good to me also, having followed all these things closely for some time past, to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, that you may have certainty regarding the things you've been taught. There are probably a lot of rumors about different healers or teachers of the time, and even about Jesus. And Luke wanted to record what he thought was most accurate and get eyewitness accounts and record those for the people to be able to be sure of this new religion that was gaining ground, Christianity. The key themes that are four of them listed there in the book of Luke include Jesus is the new prophet of God, like Elijah and Elisha, and the son of David. And he creates a relationship to the books of Samuel and Kings. Has a lot of quotations and some allusions to those books. Number two, Jesus ushers in God's plan of salvation and the kingdom of God. So Jesus is just not a new type of priest or a new king, but he's also going to usher in new relationships. In some respects, he's now fulfilling, in many respects, the new covenant that we see. Luke 22, when it talks about the baptism, even alludes to those events as well. Jesus brings salvation to all nations. So Luke was interested in Jews and Gentiles and how God's breaking barriers. From the beginning, Jesus is going to the marginalized, the women in their society who didn't have a high standing. Jesus approached them just as well. And also Gentiles, even in the story of Luke and especially in the book of Acts, and how Jesus cares for those outcasts of society. Luke chapter 1 sees a prologue that kind of gets it all started, which he tells why he's writing what he does, and then goes right into the birth narratives of both of John the Baptist and Jesus, and that encompasses the first two chapters for the most part, and then talks about the ministries of Jesus, starting with John the Baptist's ministry, Jesus' baptism, Jesus' temptation as well. He spends chapters 4-9 talking about Jesus' ministry in the north, in Galilee, following a similar plan as what Mark used. How he's rejected in his hometown Nazareth, but does some miracles in that region. And then Luke goes on and tells how he calls his disciples from their various different backgrounds, does some teachings, does some miracles, and then he does miracles that demonstrates his authority, such as the calming of the storm, the exorcism of these spirits, the woman with issue, and Jairus' blood. Just his word can change things, and so Jesus' authority is established by the miracles that are taking place. He then speaks about the ministry of Jesus in Galilee, in which Jesus is recognized. Oh, he's still speaking about his ministry in Galilee. There his disciples recognize him as the Messiah. And again, it's Peter and his big, bold statement that you are the Christ, the Son of God. The feeding of the 5,000 takes place. The 12 are sent out as well, and they're gathering ministries, followers for Jesus. But then something interesting happens in Luke chapter 9. You see, the 12 are sent out, the 5,000 are fed. He has thousands of followers. And then Jesus begins to preach about what it's going to be to follow him, which is going to be suffering and hardship. And as a result of that, his followers narrow down. So we only have a handful by the beginning of chapter 10. But in chapter 9, there's a recognition of the Messiah, the teachings that take place. And then as Jesus begins to speak about suffering, and he begins to eye Jerusalem, and Jesus' journey toward Jerusalem begins in chapter 9, verse 51. And he tells about persecution is going to come on him and those who follow him. His followers narrow down to just a handful, where we only see 72 by chapter 10, which is not much compared to the thousands we had just seen previously at the feedings. He's preparing his followers for the persecution that's going to take place, using parables, but also very vivid language. And his miracles now, instead of showing his authority, begin to confront those who are in opposition to him and to his message. Jesus makes it to Jerusalem by chapter 19, and the whole second half of the book is a picture of him going to Jerusalem as he's embracing the suffering that he's about to take place. And Passion Week begins in Luke chapter 19 and goes all the way to chapter 21. And then he's crucified and resurrected. So chapters 19 through 24 speak about this Passion Week and the resurrection of Jesus. The Gospel of Luke is interesting because it's really just the first part of a two-part series, Luke Acts, in which we get the second half of the story. But in its own right, it's a beautiful, beautiful rendition of the life of Jesus.